4. The personal matter that occupied Levin while he was talking with his brother was this. The year before, when visiting a field that was being mown, he had lost his temper with his steward, and to calm himself, had used a remedy of his own. He took a scythe from one of the peasants, and himself began mowing. He liked this work so much that he went mowing several times. He mowed all the meadow in front of his house, and when spring came, he planned to devote several whole days to mowing with the peasants. Since his brother's arrival, however, he was in doubt whether to go mowing or not. He did not feel comfortable at the thought of leaving his brother alone all day long, and he also feared that Kosnichev might laugh at him. But while walking over the meadow, he recalled the impression mowing had made on him, and almost made up his mind to do it. After his irritating conversation with his brother, he again remembered his intention. I need physical exercise. Without it, my character gets quite spoiled, thought he, and determined to go and mow, however uncomfortable his brother and the peasants might make him feel. In the evening, Constantine went to the office and gave orders about the work sending round to the villages to tell the mowers to come next day to Karenina meadow, the largest and finest he had. And please send my scythe to Titus to be sharpened, and have it taken to the meadow tomorrow. I may go mowing myself, he said, trying to overcome his confusion. The steward smiled and said, "All right, sir." That evening, at tea, Levin said to his brother, "The weather looks settled. Tomorrow we begin mowing." "Ah, I like that work very much," said Kosnichev. "I like it awfully too. I've mown with the peasants now and then, and tomorrow I want to mow all day." Kosnichev looked up at his brother in surprise. "How do you mean? All day, just like the peasants?" "Yes, it is very pleasant," replied Levin. "It is splendid physical exercise, but you will hardly be able to hold out," remarked Kosnichev, without the least sarcasm. "I've tried it. At first it seems hard, but one gets drawn into it. I don't think I shall lag behind." "Dear me! But tell me, how do the peasants take it? I expect they laugh at the crank of a master." "No, I don't think so. But it is such pleasant work, and at the same time so hard, that one has no time for thinking." "But how can you dine with them? It would not be quite the thing to send your claret and roast turkey out there." "No, I'll just come home at their dinner time." Next morning, Constantine got up earlier than usual, but giving instructions about the farming delayed him, and when he came to the meadow, each man was already mowing his second swath. From the hill, as he came to his first swath, he could see, in the shade at his feet, a part of the meadow that was already mown, with the green heaps of grass and dark piles of coats thrown down by the mowers. As he drew nearer, the peasants, following each other in a long straggling line, some with coats on, some in their shirts, each swinging his scythe in his own manner, gradually came into sight. He counted 42 of them. They moved slowly along the uneven bottom of the meadow, where a weir had once been. Levin recognized some of his own men. Old Ermil, wearing a very long white shirt, was swinging his scythe with his back bent. Young Vaska, who had been in Levin's service as coachman, and who at each swing of his scythe cut the grass the whole width of his swath. And Titus, Levin's mowing master, a thin little peasant who went along without stopping, mowing his wide swath as if in play. Levin dismounted and, tethering his horse by the roadside, went up to Titus, who fetched another scythe from behind a bush and gave it to Levin. "It's ready, master. Like a razor it will mow of itself," said Titus, taking off his cap and smiling as he handed the scythe. Levin took it and began to put himself in position. The peasants, perspiring and merry, who had finished their swaths, came out onto the road one after another, and laughingly exchanged greetings with their master. They all looked at him, but no one made any remark until a tall old man with a shriveled, beardless face, wearing a sheepskin jacket, stepped out onto the road and addressed him. "Mind, master, having put your hand to the plough, don't look back." And Levin heard the sound of repressed laughter among the mowers. "I will try not to lag behind," he said, taking his place behind Titus and waiting his turn to fall in. "Mind?" repeated the old man. Titus made room for Levin, and Levin followed him. By the roadside the grass was short and tough, and Levin, who had not done any mowing for a long time, and was confused by so many eyes upon him, mowed badly for the first 10 minutes, though he swung his scythe with much vigour. He heard voices behind him. "It's not properly adjusted. The grip is not right. See how he has to stoop," said one. "Hold the heel lower," said another. "Never mind, it's all right. He'll get into it," said the old man. "There he goes." "You are taking too wide a swath. He'll get knocked up." "He's the master, he must work. He's working for himself." "But look how uneven." "That's what the likes of us used to get a thump on the back for." They came to softer grass, and Levin, who was listening without replying, followed Titus and tried to mow as well as possible. When they had gone some 100 steps, Titus was still going on without pausing, showing no signs of fatigue, while Levin was already beginning to fear he would not be able to keep up. He felt so tired. He swung his scythe, feeling almost at the last gasp, and made up his mind to ask Titus to stop. But just at that moment, Titus stopped of his own accord, stooped, took up some grass and wiped his scythe with it. Levin straightened himself, sighed, and looked back. The peasant behind him was still mowing, but was obviously tired too, for he stopped without coming even with Levin and began wetting his scythe. Titus wetted his own and Levin's, and they began mowing again. The same thing happened at Levin's second attempt. Titus swung his scythe, swing after swing, without stopping and without getting tired. Levin followed, trying not to lag behind, but it became harder and harder, until at last the moment came when he felt he had no strength left, and then Titus again stopped and began wetting his scythe. In this way they finished the swaths. They were long, and to Levin seemed particularly difficult, but when it was done, and Titus with his scythe over his shoulder turned about and slowly retraced his steps, placing his feet on the marks left on the mown surface by the heels of his boots, and Levin went down his own swath in the same way. Then, in spite of the perspiration that ran down his face in streams and dripped from his nose, and though his back was as wet as if the shirt had been soaked in water, he felt very light-hearted. What gave him most pleasure was the knowledge that he would be able to keep up with the peasants. The only thing marring his joy was the fact that his swath was not well mown. "I must swing this scythe less with my arms and more with the whole of my body," he thought, comparing Titus's swath, cut straight as if by measure, with his own, on which the grass lay scattered and uneven. As Levin was aware, Titus had been mowing this swath with special rapidity, probably to put his master to the test, and it chanced to be a very long one. The next swaths were easier, but still Levin had to work with all his might to keep even with the peasants. He thought of nothing and desired nothing, except not to lag behind and to do his work as well as possible. He heard only the swishing of the scythes, and saw only the receding figure of Titus, the convex half-circle of the mown piece before him, and the grasses and heads of flowers falling in waves about the blade of his scythe, and in the background, the end of the swath where he would rest. Suddenly he was conscious of a pleasant coolness on his hot, perspiring shoulders, without knowing what it was or whence it came. He glanced up at the sky whilst wetting his scythe. A dark cloud was hanging low overhead, and large drops of rain were falling. Some of the peasants went to put on their coats. Others as well as Levin felt pleasure in the refreshing rain, and merely moved their shoulders up and down. They came to the end of another swath. They went on mowing long and short rows, good and poor grass. Levin had lost count of time and had really no idea whether it was late or early. His work was undergoing a change which gave him intense pleasure. While working, he sometimes forgot for some minutes what he was about, and felt quite at ease. Then his mowing was nearly as even as that of Titus. But as soon as he began thinking about it, and trying to work better, he at once felt how hard the task was, and mowed badly. He finished a swath, and was about to start another, when Titus paused and went up to the old man, and both looked at the sun. "What are they talking about, and why don't they start another swath?" thought Levin. It did not occur to him that the peasants, who had been mowing unceasingly for 4 hours, wanted their breakfast. "Breakfast time, master," said the old man. "Is it time?" Well then, breakfast. Levin handed his scythe to Titus, and with the peasants, who were going to fetch the bread that lay with their coats, went across the swaths of the long-mown portion of the meadow, slightly sprinkled with rain. Only then he remembered that he had not been right about the weather, and that the rain was wetting the hay. "The hay will be spoiled," said he. "It won't hurt, master. Mow in the rain, rake when it's fine." Levin untied his horse and rode home to his coffee. By the time Levin had finished breakfast, Kosnichev had only just got up, and Levin went back to the meadow before Kosnichev had come to table. 5. After breakfast, Levin got placed between a humorous old man who invited him to be his neighbour, and a young peasant who had only got married last autumn and was now out for his first summer's mowing. The old man went along holding himself erect, moving with regular long steps, turning out his toes, and with a precise and even motion that seemed to cost him no more effort than swinging his arms when walking. He laid the grass in a level high ridge, as if in play or as if the sharp scythe of its own accord whisked through the juicy grass. Young Mishka went behind Levin. His pleasant young face, with a wisp of grass tied round the forehead over his hair, worked all over with the effort. But whenever anyone glanced at him, he smiled. Evidently he would have rather died than confess that the work was trying. Between these two went Levin. Now, in the hottest part of the day, the work did not seem so hard to him. The perspiration in which he was bathed was cooling, and the sun which burnt his back, his head and his arm, bare to the elbow, added to his strength and perseverance in his task. And those unconscious intervals when it became possible not to think of what he was doing recurred more and more often. The scythe seemed to mow of itself. Those were happy moments. Yet more joyous were the moments when, reaching the river at the lower end of the swaths, the old man would wipe his scythe with the wet grass, rinse its blade in the clear water, and dipping his wet stone box in the stream, would offer it to Levin. "A little of my kvass? It's good," said he, with a wink. And really Levin thought he had never tasted any nicer drink than this lukewarm water with green stuff floating in it, and a flavour of the rusty tin box. And then came the ecstasy of a slow walk, one hand resting on the scythe, when there was a leisure to wipe away the streams of perspiration, to breathe deep, to watch the line of mowers, and to see what was going on around in forest and field. The longer Levin went on mowing, the oftener he experienced those moments of oblivion, when his arms no longer seemed to swing the scythe, but the scythe itself his whole body, so conscious and full of life. And as if by magic, regularly and definitely without a thought being given to it, the work accomplished itself of its own accord. These were blessed moments. It was trying only when thought became necessary in order to mow around a molehill or a space where the hard sorrel stalks had not been weeded out. The old man accomplished this with ease. When he came to a molehill, he would change his action, and with a short jerk of the point and then of the heel of his scythe, he would mow all around the molehill. And while doing this, he noted everything he came to. Now he plucked a sorrel stalk and ate it, or offered it to Levin. Now he threw aside a branch with the point of his scythe, or examined a quail's nest from which the hen bird had flown up, almost under the scythe. Or he caught a beetle, lifting it with the scythe point as with a fork, and after showing it to Levin, threw it away. Levin and the young fellow on the other side of him found such changes of action difficult. Both of them, having got into one strained kind of movement, were in the grip of feverish labour, and had not the power to change the motion of their bodies, and at the same time to observe what lay before them. Levin did not notice how time passed. Had he been asked how long he had been mowing, he would have answered, "Half an hour," although it was nearly noon. As they were about to begin another swath, the old man drew Levin's attention to the little boys and girls approaching from all sides along the road and through the long grass, hardly visible above it, carrying jugs of kvass stoppered with rags, and bundles of bread which strained their little arms. "Look at the midges crawling along," he said, pointing to the children and glancing at the sun from under his lifted hand. They completed 2 more swaths, and then the old man stopped. "Come, master, it's dinner time," said he with decision. All the mowers on reaching the river went across the swaths to where their coats lay, and where the children who had brought their dinners sat waiting for them. The men who had driven from a distance gathered in the shadow of their carts. Those who lived nearer sheltered under the willow growth on which they hung grass. Levin sat down beside them. He did not want to go away. All the peasants' restraint in the presence of the master had vanished. The men began preparing for dinner. Some had a wash. The young lads bathed in the river. Others arranged places for their after-dinner rest, unfastened their bags of bread, and unstoppered their jugs of kvass. The old man broke some rye bread into a bowl, mashed it with a spoon handle, poured over it some water from his tin, broke more bread into it, and salted it, and then, turning to the east, said grace. "Come, master, have some of my dinner," said he, kneeling in front of his bowl. The bread and water was so nice that Levin gave up all intention of going home to lunch. He shared the old man's meal and got into conversation with him about his domestic affairs, taking a lively interest in them and telling him about his own, giving him all the particulars which would interest the old peasant. When the old man got up and, having said grace, lay down beneath the willows with an armful of grass under his head, Levin did the same, regardless of the flies, importunate and persistent in the sunshine, and of the crawling insects that tickled his perspiring face and body. He at once fell asleep, waking only when the sun touched the opposite side of the willows and reached him. The old man had already been long awake and sat setting the scythes for the young men. Levin looked round and hardly recognized the place. Everything was so altered. A wide expanse of the meadow was already mown, and with its swaths of grass already given off perfume, shone with a peculiar fresh brilliance in the oblique rays of the descending sun. The bushes by the river where the grass had been cut, and the river itself with its curves, previously invisible, were now glittering like steel. And the people getting up and moving about, the steep wall of yet uncut grass, and the hawks soaring over the bare meadow, struck him as something quite new. When he was fully awake, Levin began to calculate how much had been done, and how much could still be done that day. An extraordinary amount had been done by the 42 men. The larger meadow, which in the days of serfdom had taken 32 men 2 days to mow, was all finished, except some short patches at the corners. But Levin wanted to get as much as possible done that day, and it was vexatious to see the sun already declining. He was not feeling at all tired, and was only longing to work again, and to accomplish as much as he could. "What do you think? Could you manage to get Mushkin Heights mown today?" he asked the old man. "Well, God willing, we might. The sun is not very high, though. Perhaps, if the lads could have a little vodka." At half-time, when they sat down again, and those who smoked were lighting their pipes, the old man informed the young fellows that if they mowed the Mushkin Heights, there would be vodka. "What? Not mow that? Come along, Titus. We'll get it clear in no time." "You can eat your fill at night. Let's begin," shouted different voices, and the mowers took their places, finishing their bread as they went. "Now then, lads, keep going," said Titus, starting off ahead almost at a trot. Go on," said the old man, hurrying after him and easily catching him up. "Take care, I'll mow you down." And young and old vied with each other at mowing, but in spite of their haste, they did not spoil the grass, and the swaths fell just as evenly and exactly as before. The small patch that was left in the last corner was mown in 5 minutes, and whilst the last mowers were finishing their swaths, those in front, carrying their coats over their shoulders, were already crossing the road toward Mushkin Heights. The sun was already setting toward the trees when, with their tin boxes rattling, they entered the wooded ravine of the heights. The grass that in the middle of the ravine reached to their waists was delicate, soft, and broad-bladed, speckled here and there with cow wheat. After a short consultation as to whether they should mow the ravine across or lengthwise, Prochor, a gigantic dark man and a famous mower, took the lead. He went in front, mowed a swath, turned round and restarted. Following him, all the others took their places, going downhill along the creek and back up to the very skirts of the wood. The sun had set behind the wood and now shone only on the mowers at the top of the hill, while in the valley, where the mists were rising, they were in cool, dewy shade. The work proceeded briskly. The scented grass, cut down with a sound that showed how juicy it was, fell in high ridges. On the short swaths, the mowers crowded together, their tin boxes clattering, their scythes ringing whenever they touched, the whetstones whistling upon the blades, and their merry voices resounding as they urged each other on. Levin was again mowing between the old man and the lad. The old man, who had put on a sheepskin jacket, was still as jolly, witty, and easy in his movements as before. In the wood, their scythes continually cut down wood mushrooms, grown plump amid the juicy grass. The old man stopped each time he came upon one, picked it up, and put it inside his jacket, saying, "Another treat for my old woman." It was easy to cut the wet, soft grass, but on the other hand, it was very difficult to go up and down the steep slopes of the ravine. This, however, did not trouble the old man. Swinging his scythe just as usual, taking short steps with feet shod in large bark-plated shoes, he slowly climbed the slopes, and though his whole body and his loosely hanging trousers shook, he did not miss a single mushroom or a curious grass, and continued joking with the other peasants and with Levin. Levin followed, and often thought he would certainly fall when climbing a mound with his scythe in his hand, a mound so steep that it would have been hard to climb even unencumbered. Still, he managed to climb it, and to do all that had to be done, and he felt as if some external force were urging him on. 6. Mashkin heights were mown, and the peasants, having completed their last swaths, put on their coats and went home in high spirits. Levin, having regretfully taken leave of him, mounted and rode home. He looked back from the top of the hill. He could not see the men, for the mist rising from the hollow hid them, but he heard their merry, rough voices, laughter, and the clanking of the scythes. Kosnichev had long had his dinner, and was in his room drinking iced water with lemon, while looking over the papers and magazines just arrived by post, when Levin rushed in, his tangled hair clinging to his moist brow, his shirt saturated back and front, and dark with perspiration, and cried out joyfully, "We've finished the whole of the meadow. How delightful it is! And how have you got on?" Levin had quite forgotten the unpleasant conversation of the previous day. "Dear me, what a sight you are," said Kosnichev, turning to his brother with a momentary look of vexation. The door! Shut it!" he exclaimed. "You've certainly let in a whole dozen." Kosnichev could not bear flies, and opened the windows in his room only at night, keeping the door carefully closed. "No, not one, I swear. And if I have, I'll catch it." "You would not believe what enjoyment it was. And how have you spent the day?" "Quite well." "But have you really been mowing all day? You must be as hungry as a wolf. Kuzma has everything ready for you." "No, I don't want to eat. I've had something there. But I'll go and wash." Yes, go, and I will come presently." Kosnichev shook his head as he looked at his brother. Go, and be quick," he added with a smile, as, gathering together his books, he prepared to go too. He also felt suddenly quite cheerful and did not wish to part from his brother. "And where were you when it rained?" "What rain was that? Only a few drops." "Well then, I'll come back directly. So have you spent the day all right? That's good." And Levin went off to dress. 5 minutes later, the brothers met again in the dining room. Though Levin had imagined that he was not hungry, and sat down to table only not to offend Kuzma, yet when he began eating, he thought everything delicious. Kosnichev smiled as he looked at him. "Ah, yes, there's a letter for you," said he. "Kuzma, please bring it. It's downstairs, and mind you shut the door." The letter was from Oblonsky. Levin read it aloud. Oblonsky wrote from Petersburg. "I've had a letter from Dolly. She's in Ergushevo, and everything is out of gear there. Please go and see her and help her with your advice. You know all about everything. She's quite alone, poor thing. My mother-in-law is still abroad." "That's splendid. I will certainly go and see her," said Levin. "Or shall we both go? She's such a good woman. Don't you think so?" "Is it far from here?" "A little over 25 miles, or maybe even 30, but the road is excellent. We'll have a fine drive." "I shall be very glad," replied Kosnichev, still smiling. The sight of his younger brother had a distinctly cheering influence on him. "I must say you have an appetite," he said, glancing at the sunburned, ruddy face bent over the plate. "Fine. You would hardly believe what a remedy is for every kind of folly. I'm thinking of enriching medicine with a new word. Arbeitskur. You would hardly require it, I should say." "No, but those who suffer from their nerves do." "Yes, it ought to be tested. You know, I thought of coming to the meadow to have a look at you, but it was so unbearably hot that I got only as far as the forest. I sat there a little, and then went through the forest to the village, where I met your old wet nurse, and sounded her as to what the peasants think of you. From her I understand that they do not approve of your doing it. She said, 'It's not gentlefolk's work.' It seems to me that on the whole, in the people's opinion, a very decided demand for what they call gentlefolk's work exists, and they don't approve of the gentry going outside the bounds they set for them. Possibly, but it is a pleasure such as I've never in my life experienced before, and there's nothing wrong in it." "Don't you think so too?" replied Levin. "If they don't like it, it can't be helped. Besides, I think it's all right, eh?" "I see that on the whole you're very satisfied with your day." "Very well indeed. We finished the meadow, and I chummed up with such a fine old man. You can't imagine what a charming fellow he is." "Well then, you're satisfied with your day, and so am I. First of all, I solved 2 chess problems, one a very good one, beginning with the pawn move. I'll show it to you. And afterwards, I thought over our yesterday's conversation." "What about yesterday's conversation?" asked Levin, who had finished dinner and sat blissfully blinking and puffing, quite unable to remember what yesterday's conversation had been about. "I think you're partly right. Our disagreement lies in the fact that you consider personal interests the motive power, while I think every man with a certain degree of education ought to be interested in the general welfare. You may be right in thinking that activity backed by material interest is best, but your nature is altogether prime sautière, as the French say. You want passionate, energetic activity, or nothing at all." Levin listened to his brother, but understood absolutely nothing, and did not wish to understand. He was only afraid his brother might put some question which could elicit the fact that he was not paying attention. "That's what it is, old chap," said Koznetchev, patting Constantine's shoulder. "Yes, of course, but what matter? I don't insist on my view," replied Levin, with a guilty, childlike smile. "What can I have been disputing about?" he thought. "Of course I was right, and he was right too, so it's all right. But I must go round to the office." He rose, stretching himself, and smiling. Koznetchev smiled too. "Shall we go for a stroll together?" he said, not wishing to part from his brother, who seemed to be exhaling freshness and vigour. "Come along. We could call in at the office if you want to." "Oh, dear me!" exclaimed Levin, so loudly that he scared Koznetchev. "What's the matter?" "How's Agatha Mikhailovna's arm?" asked Levin, slapping his head. "I'd forgotten all about it." "Much better." "Well, I'll run and see her all the same. You won't have got your hat before I'm back." And his heels clattered swiftly down the stairs, making a noise like a rattle.